Again, Mark here from Talking Bass. This week I'm going to take a quick look at walking bass lines and the 3 things that you ought to be striving to include in your practice routine, but that many people neglect. As always, the lesson material and tracks are all there over at Talking Bass, so just click the link in the info below to play along, and while you're there, check out the lesson map where you'll find hundreds of extra lessons on all aspects of bass playing, including many lessons devoted to walking bass lines. So if you're looking to get walking, go check it out. Okay, so as many of you may know, I have a dedicated walking course over at Talking Bass, and just as with most walking bass methods, the course focuses on developing your improvisation of bass lines from a basic 2 feel through to standard walking in every area of the fretboard. Now, this is all fine because, as you probably realise, walking bass is generally improvised, and practicing the application of chord tones and scales from an improvisational perspective is important. But there are some extra areas of practice that you really want to implement in developing that vocabulary. The 3 tips that I've got for you are to read and learn pre-composed lines, analyse lines and harmony, and lastly, write your own lines. For tip number 1, we have reading pre-composed lines. Now this is the equivalent of reading the written word when learning a language. By reading well-written lines and transcriptions, you get to learn how other people create lines, and you get to practice in a walking style without all the pressure of coming up with your own stuff. Now, I'd recommend reading lines without tab, even if you're currently a non-reader. Yes, you'll have to figure out what the notes are on the stave and where the notes are on the bass, but over time you'll improve your reading, and more importantly, you'll be able to work out your own fingerings for the lines. A lot of walking involves looking ahead, targeting notes, and planning out a strategy for getting, from one area of the neck to another. You don't want to be getting too caught up in seeing them as a bunch of fretboard numbers. So as an example, let's have a look at a line that I've written over the jazz standard There Will Never Be Another You. I've written out the line in bass clef and provided a backing track over at Talking Bass. The line contains a lot of different melodic devices working around the basic chord tone framework, so I'll just play through the line and then give you some extra pointers on learning it. So if you're a pretty good reader, this line will be pretty straightforward. It's in the key of E flat, as you can see from the key signature, and the lines are basically diatonic with some very basic chromatic approach and passing tones. But if you're just getting started with reading, don't worry about digesting it all in one go. Take it 1 or 2 bars at a time. Work on those bars and then add another. Gradually build the line and don't worry about metronomes or backing tracks or anything like that. Play it in your own time, out of time, just getting the notes down. So if we just look at the first few bars, you want to work out those first few notes. So if we look at that first bar, we have E flat, then D, E flat, and F. Okay, so just practice around those for a while. So, and then we can move on to the next bar. So E flat, D, E flat, F, and then we're up to the G, then the A flat, the B flat, and the C. Okay, so we have. Now, once you've climbed up those first 2 bars, you might notice that we're just outlining a simple E flat major scale. Once you've figured that out, it can make memorizing the line much easier. You just think E flat major scale with a little turn at the bottom from the E flat to the D, and back, and then we're just working up as far as the C. And we're aiming for the D minor 7 flat 5 in the next chord. So you can see there how we're working up through that E flat major scale, targeting the D up there at the 7th fret of the G string. Now, as you can see here, I've played that E flat major scale starting on the A string there at the 6th fret. Now, I could have also played it here on the D string. You know, I could have come up there, I could have even come up from the E string. There are many ways to play any line, and that's the beauty of working without the tab. We're not learning an exact copy of fingering played by someone else, we're just learning the notes, plain and simple, and finding the most comfortable way for ourselves as we progress. So we've worked through those first 2 bars, so now let's add the next bar. So we're on the D minor 7 flat 5, we're up at the D here at the 7th fret of the G string, and I come up D, then we've got E flat, F, F sharp, and up to the G, okay? Okay, so like I said, just take it one note at a time. You know, if you don't know what those notes are, you can just work them out, okay? You work them out, you then work out where they are on the neck, and then you just, you know, go for it like that. So D, E flat, F, F sharp, and up to that G. So if we add all of those 3 bars together, then once we're up to the G7 there, we're up on that G there, 3 ledger lines up, and then we come down G, F, and then D, D flat, which is approaching the next chord of C, okay? So G, F, D, D flat, C. So let's add all of that together. Okay, and that's those first 4 bars. So you can just go round and round those in your own time, just getting them down. So after working through those 4 bars, you'll have a line under your fingers, and at first you'll probably struggle to remember it, and this is why you shouldn't feel the pressure to use a metronome or a drum track. Just practice round and round on those 4 bars until you have them down. Then add some more, you know, add another bar and another bar. Always following along with the music as you do that and relating the notes to the chords, you know, so you can see what you're targeting, what the chord tones are, and over time, every aspect of your playing is going to start to improve. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to get some practice at playing in the walking style without any of that pressure of improvising. And on this front, I'd recommend a few things from a technical standpoint. First of all, pay attention to your note duration. Each note should be played full length. So we don't want this. You know, they're not staccato, but we don't have a full length. You know, we don't want that. What we want is this. Okay, so you can hear how each note leads into the next. Okay? I'd also recommend playing a little closer to the neck to get that deeper, more upright sound, and also play fairly light. You're going to avoid all of the clanking, you know, you don't want any of that, and your overall tone and sustain is going to improve. Now, obviously, this is a totally different thing from how you might play in a funk tune, you know, with stronger attack around the bridge. But like I said, this is all a stylistic consideration. So if I first, you know, play through those first few bars, I'm playing around here, so we've got that deeper tone, and I'm playing fairly light. If I was to play really hard, you know, that's not what we want. It's, you know, much, much lighter. Okay, so for tip number 2, we've got analysis. Now, this encompasses both harmonic analysis, where we rip apart the chord progression, and melodic analysis, where we take a look at the actual notes in the walking line. The harmonic analysis of a tune is important because it tells us about the landscape that we're walking over, what chord tones we can use, what scales we can use, what key or keys we're in, and a whole lot more. The melodic analysis of a walking line shows how someone else has applied all of that stuff. You get to see vocabulary in action, which allows you to add those lines into your own playing. So I'll be very quick with the examples here because I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole in terms of the theory, but just be aware that I do have quite a few theory lessons here on the TalkingBass channel, and will be releasing a few more jazz harmony lessons in coming weeks. So if you don't understand anything that I say here, don't worry, you just need to build up from the basics. So let's have a look at the chord progression for There Will Never Be Another You, and I'll just work through the chords in turn and tell you what they are in terms of the function. So if we look at the key signature there, we know we're in E E flat, okay? So when you're in E flat, you have a certain set of diatonic chords. So in E flat, we're going to have E flat major 7, F major 7, then G minor 7, and then A flat major 7. Then we've got B flat 7, then C minor 7, and then finally D minor 7 flat 5, and back to E flat major 7. So that's as seventh chords. You can do that with triads as well, but that's our diatonic set. Now, if you don't understand anything about that, like I said, I do have lessons devoted to that, so I won't linger on that for the moment. And remember, all of those are numbered. So chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, chord 4, etc. So for the first chord, we've got E flat major 7, which is a basic chord 1, okay? Then for the next chord, we've got D minor 7 flat 5 and then G7. So D minor 7 flat 5 is chord 7, okay? That's diatonic, it's the minor 7 flat 5, okay? Then for the G7, what note is that? Well, it's a G, we're in E flat, so 1, 2, 3. It should be chord 3, but chord 3 in a major key should be a minor 7, but here we've got a G7. So that's actually called a secondary dominant chord. So I'm not gonna, like I say, I'm not going to waste time talking about it, but that is the secondary dominant chord on chord 3. Then that leads us into the C minor 7, which is chord 6, just basic diatonic. Then we move down to B flat minor 7 and then E flat 7. Now again, that should be a B flat dominant 7, but we've got minor 7 followed by the E flat 7, which is actually a little 2-5 progression. So that's a 2, 5, 1, next chord being A flat, in the key of A flat major 7. Now, we're not actually changing key. This is actually something called tonicization. We're actually just playing a 2-5 in A flat to lead us to that A flat, which is actually chord 4. So think of the A flat major 7 as chord 4, and we've just got a temporary 2-5 to lead into it, which is a very, very common move in jazz standards, okay? So there we're on the chord 4. We're in that general vicinity now. Then we've got a D flat 7, okay, which, you know, that's actually out of the key. So we would normally have a D minor 7 flat 5 there. It would normally be a D natural, but we've got D flat. This is actually called a backdoor cadence. So this is the flattened 7th degree in there as a dominant 7, which is actually the same chord that you would have in the parallel minor. So instead of an E flat major key, we're actually borrowing from the key of E flat minor, okay? So that's a D flat 7. We call it a backdoor cadence because that leads us back in there. So you'll see that in songs like Misty, you get it in there, and also other tunes like Stella by Starlight. It's a very, very popular cadence. So that D flat 7 leads us back into E flat major 7, which is chord 1. Then we've got chord 6, C minor 7, and then we move to F7. Now normally that should be an F minor 7, but this is a dominant 7. So again, this is a chord 2 secondary dominant, which then changes to a normal chord 2, F minor 7, and then the normal chord 5, which is B flat 7, which can lead us back round with a normal authentic cadence back to E flat, okay? So that's the first half of the tune there. So a lot of those terms might have just gone over your head. It might just all sound like completely nuts. But for those of you that know a little bit about diatonic harmony, about 2-5-1s, about cadences, especially 2-5s, and secondary dominants, then you could probably work out what that is. Now, is that really important to know? Well, yes it is, because each function that we have there provides a different set of chord tones and a certain type of function that is going to influence what kind of notes we're going to have in the scales if we're going to be creating scalar movement. So yeah, this stuff is important. In the second half of the tune, it's pretty much the same. We've got the E flat major 7, D minor 7 flat 5, G7, all the same, C minor 7 the same, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, the 2-5 again to chord 4, A flat major 7, backdoor cadence, chord 1, and then we've got this little strange A minor 7 to D7, which is actually, I mean, I would normally say that would be an A minor 7 flat 5, but I'm actually using the chords that you see in the real book here. But I would say that's more likely to be an A minor 7 flat 5 to D7, which is leading us as a minor 2-5 into a G minor. So you would kind of expect a G minor there, but we don't resolve it to the G minor, and instead come back to chord 1. and then we just have this cyclic movement of E flat, D7, G minor 7, C7, F minor, B flat 7, E flat, which is kind of like a big, well, it's not a turnaround, but it's just a stepwise cyclic progression. So it's all pretty much in the key of E flat there. Chord 1, chord 7 as a dominant, so that's a secondary dominant. Then G minor 7, chord 3 to C7, chord 6, secondary dominant. F minor 7, normal 2, normal 5, 1. Okay, so you can hear that stepping stone movement. Okay, stepping stones from the E flat all the way back to the E flat through the key, using those little secondary dominants in there to give us those little temporary kind of 2-5 progressions. So how can that analysis help us with creating a walking bass line? Well, for a start, we've got the chord tones in there, okay? So you need to know what the arpeggios are of all of those chords. So you need to go through them, just working through them. E flat major 7, D minor 7 flat 5, G7, C minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, etc. Okay, and that instantly gives you some resources to use in terms of creating the actual walking line. And if you use those chord tones, you will sound like you are outlining the chord progression. So you become a lot more functional as a bass player in that sense. So that's the first thing. We've got the chord tones. But the deeper dive of that harmonic analysis will give us a little bit more information in terms of the other notes in there. So we've got the chord tones, but then we want the scale notes in between. We want to join those notes up. So instead of the E flat major 7 arpeggio, we want to join it up. Okay, so we want to use the scalar notes. And that's what this analysis gives us. So I'll quickly just run through these chords and give you an indication of what the scales are. So I'll just list them first and then give you a little bit of information about why we've got those scales in there. So first of all, we've got chord 1, E flat major 7 in E flat major. So we've got E flat major scale. It's chord 1 in E flat major, okay? So we can use the E flat major scale over the E flat major 7. Then we've got chord 7, D minor 7 flat 5, which is a D Locrian scale. Okay, then we've got the G7. Now this is a secondary dominant on chord 3, so we could use a Phrygian dominant scale, which is pretty much the fifth mode of the harmonic minor scale, which is basically a Mixolydian scale with a flattened second and a flattened sixth. But I prefer on these things to actually use the Mixolydian flat sixth scale. So you basically use a major second instead of the flat second. So it's basically a Mixolydian with a flattened sixth, okay? And it's just a little bit smoother rather than having that odd, you know, that kind of Spanish sounding A flat in there. And in that sense, we're kind of using a melodic minor scale instead of a harmonic minor scale, but don't worry about that too much for now. Next, we're on C minor 7, which is just a basic chord 6, so that would be the natural minor scale. Also seen as the Aeolian mode. Then we move on to the B flat minor 7, which is going to be a B flat Dorian scale. And then the E flat 7, which is an E flat Mixolydian. Okay, so again, I'm just altering the notes slightly of the normal diatonic modes to accommodate these little chromatic alterations. So the B flat minor 7 there, it would normally be a B flat 7, but we flattened the third. So I flattened the third in the Mixolydian scale, which gives us a Dorian, and that's how I'm basically doing it. So B flat Dorian, E flat Mixolydian, and then we're into A flat major 7, which is chord 4, so that would be the Lydian scale normally. Then D flat 7, which is our backdoor cadence, the chord flat 7. So using the same logic that we had for creating these kind of chromatic modes, we're going to have a D flat Lydian dominant. Okay, so it's pretty much a thing. You can either think Mixolydian scale with a sharpened 4th or a Lydian scale with a flattened 7th. Okay, either way. Then E flat major 7, we're back to the E flat major scale, and then chord 6, C minor 7, again C natural minor scale. Then F7, so again this is a secondary dominant on chord 2, so we're going to use the Mixolydian scale for this, so this is going to be F Mixolydian. And then we've got the F minor 7, which is the F Dorian scale, followed by B flat 7, which is the Mixolydian scale. So we've got a set of scales there, or chord scales that work with each of those chords for that first half of the tune. So I won't bother working through the second half of the tune there because there's not much point. It's pretty much the same thing with just some very quick successions of chords in there, so we wouldn't really get to move through scales very much at all. But you get the idea here. So when you do a harmonic analysis and you kind of learn about how these chords work within a key, what kind of scales you could use with them, it gives you a lot of different resources and nuts and bolts for creating the actual lines in there. Now, bear in mind, a lot of the time, you're not really going to be thinking, oh, it's got to be a Lydian dominant and, you know, a Phrygian dominant and all that kind of stuff. You kind of get used to what they are anyway and just work around the chord tones, okay? So you'll be working around the chord tones and then using chromatic approach and stuff like that to lead into the next chord, which is what we'll be looking at next. So, next for the melodic analysis, you want to work through the notes of a walking line and you want to relate every note to the chords and key in effect. So, I'll just work through the first few bars just to give you an idea of how this works. So, with this line, we began with the E flat, then down to the D, and then came up through the E flat major scale. So, pretty much, that's all you need to know for that. As an analysis, we're pretty much just using the E flat major scale. There's no chromatic notes in there or anything like that. You could say that that's this little turn at the bottom from the root note to the 7th and then coming up. But again, we don't have any chromatics in there. It's just a scale. So it's the E flat major scale over the E flat major 7, and we're targeting that D in the next scale, next chord. Now, when we get to the D minor 7 flat 5, we come up with D, then E flat, then the F sharp, and then the G. So this little line here, what's going on here? Well, remember how I said that was the D Locrian scale? So basically the E flat major scale starting on a D. So we come up through the first 3 notes of that scale, D, E flat, and F. So it's the root note, the minor 2nd, and then the minor 3rd. But then we've got an F sharp leading us up to the G. So we're targeting the G. So the first 3 notes there, and then that little chromatic note, the F sharp, acts as a chromatic approach into the G. So we get this smooth movement into the G, and it's a little chromatic passing note between that 3rd of the scale and the root of the next one. So, you know, you can see it as a chromatic approach or a chromatic passing note. Either way, it doesn't really matter. It's basically just filling in the blank. So we're just coming up, and then we need to get to the G. We're on the F. There's a note in between. Let's fill it in. So, you know, you can describe them in all these ways with chromatic passing notes and all of this kind of stuff, when in fact, when you look at it visually, you can just see we're just filling in the gap. Over the G7, we start at the G and we come down, G, F, D, D flat, C. So we're coming down through the chord tones this time. So the chord tones being the G7 there, we come down G, F, D, so it's root, 7th, and then the 5th. And then we've got another note to fill in to get to the C. So again, we're just going to use that chromatic passing note or chromatic approach note to lead into the C. Okay, so chord tones and then chromatic approach. So you can see how this is working. You want to relate all of the notes to the chords by chord tone or chord scale, and then these little chromatic notes in there fill in those gaps. You see them as chromatic passing notes, chromatic approach, sometimes chromatic kind of neighbor note functions, that kind of stuff. But it's, at the end of the day, it's just the notes outside of the diatonic notes that you're just filling in the gaps. For the C minor 7, we're coming down the C natural minor scale. So this is just a basic drop down through the scale, so nothing really to think about there. Then when we get down to the B flat minor 7, we land on the B flat and we come up B flat, C, C sharp, and then D. Now this is a very, very common move in walking bass lines. So again, we've got the B flat, then the C, C sharp, D, and then the E flat. So again, it's a B flat minor, so we've got the B flat, the root note, then the 2nd degree leading up to the 3rd. So it's just a basic scale movement through the B flat Dorian. And then we've got another note to add on beat 4. We're leading into the E flat. So again, chromatic note leading in. Scale notes, chromatic note, and we land on the E flat, okay? And this is how you can create these nice smooth lines with chromatic passing notes. For the E flat 7, we're on the E flat. We want to be aiming for the A flat. So we come up through the major arpeggio. So we've got E flat, G, and then the B flat. And then again, we fill in the gap with the chromatic passing note to bring us down to the A flat. Again, a very, very common walking bass line. So again, E flat up to the A flat. We use the arpeggio to give us a little bit more distance there. And then we come down from above. Then for the A flat major 7, we simply come down through the A flat major scale, so which lands us down nicely on the D flat. Okay, so we're coming down A flat, G, F, E flat, down to the D flat. Now remember what I said about the D flat 7? It's that backdoor cadence. So we could use the notes from that Lydian Dominant scale, but all I'm going to do here, because we've got the D flat to the E flat, it's the movement of a whole step. There's not much distance to move. So all I'm going to do is drop down a little to the C and then come up with this chromatic line. So I'm just going to use basically a chromatic approach to the E flat. So D flat, C, D flat, D, E flat. Okay, so it's kind of like solving a puzzle, you know, when you see these kind of little movements, you know, the root movement by just a whole step, you think, how am I going to do that? So it's a little puzzle, so you can figure out, you know, a little line that'll work in that small area, and then once you've got it, you just add it into your vocabulary. So I won't bother with any more of the melodic analysis. You can actually work through those lines that I've provided and try to figure them out yourself. Remember, look for the chord tones, try to see arpeggios in there, triads, seventh chords, see the arpeggio movement, and then look for the little chromatic passing notes. At the same time, just look for the scale notes in there that are joining up those chord tones. So that's tips 1 and 2. Lastly, we have tip number 3, which is to write your own lines. So you want to take a standard, like There Will Never Be Another You, grab some manuscript paper and compose your own line using all the resources that we've looked at. Work around the chord tones, use diatonic and chromatic passing notes or approach notes to target each chord in turn, and aim for a smooth line with a nice flowing arc. Remember, if you can't compose your own lines, then there's no way you're going to be able to improvise a line. When you improvise, you're simply composing a line on the fly. So take your time and write the line out. Again, this is more good practice at learning to read and understand musical notation. Once you've written out a line, be sure to play through it and try it along with a backing track. You'll be able to hear what sounds good and bad in your note choice. Some lines might seem to work in theory and might look okay on paper, but then when you play them over a track, they might just sound a little lacking. This is great practice, and by steadily amending phrases bit by bit, you'll eventually come up with something that you like. Then once you've written a line for one whole chorus, write another, you know, and try to approach the chords in different original ways. You'll find yourselves coming up with more and more lines that you'd never even thought of. Some might sound, you know, awful to you, but some will sound great. It's all a voyage of discovery. So try writing 8 different lines out over the same tune and you'll be well on your way to better walking improvisation. Okay, so that's my 3 tips on developing your walking bass. Remember to like, subscribe and leave a comment, then go check out the walking line and track over at TalkingBass by clicking on the link in the info below. If you really want to get into some more walking, remember there's the Simple Steps to Walking Bass course in the TalkingBass store that contains many hours of video content, backing tracks and written lesson material. So go check it out and I'll see you next week.